Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this Brainwaves webinar on getting along brilliantly, encouraging positive relationships with young people. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Tracy, and I'm your host for this afternoon. So today marks the second in our series of webinars exploring each letter within the PERMA framework that underpins the concept of positive psychology. And as we just mentioned, today we're honing in on the R for relationships and how we can nurture and encourage them with our young people in schools. To lead the conversation on this today, we're delighted to welcome Professor Sue Roffey. Hi, Sue.
Hi there.
Would you like just to give us a quick introduction to yourself?
Hello, I'm Dr. Sue Roffey. I am a psychologist. I was a teacher. I'm now an academic, and I have been writing about student and school wellbeing for a long time. I edited a book called Positive Relationships, Evidence-Based Practice Across the World some time ago.
Amazing. Thank you for joining us, Sue. It's lovely to have you here. We're also very pleased to welcome to our discussion Laura Piercy. Hi, Laura.
Hi, Tracy. Hi, everyone. I'm Laura Piercy. I'm the Associate Director of the LeSwap Consortium in Camden, and I'm also the Pathways and Progress Leader for Ackland Burley School. I've done lots of jobs within secondary schools, but now I mainly specialise in pathways support for young people.
Amazing. Thanks, Laura. And just to add as well that Laura is with Ackland Burley and the LeSwap Consortium, one of our research schools within the Brainwaves programme. So it's lovely to welcome you today.
Thank you.
Hi, Julian. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Looking forward to this very much.
Good stuff.
I'm Julian Turner. I'm leading the education part of the Brainwaves programme, and I also have been very involved with Camden schools over the years. I'm a director of Camden Learning, which is the school improvement partnership in Camden.
Amazing. Thank you. It's amazing to have you all here today. I'm so excited to get into the conversation. If you haven't joined us before, very quickly, we've got about half an hour conversation with our panelists, during which time you're very welcome to join in the chat. I think everybody knows how to do that, but it's the speech bubble icon. The only thing to remember is to share your comments with all, and then we can all, as it says, share with your with what you've typed in and join in with the conversation that way. At the end, if there's any questions that people would like to ask, we'd be very happy to take some questions. So to do that, you can do the click on the Q&A button and type in your question there if there's anything that comes up. So just before we start today, and we're going to do this for all of our webinars now on within the PERMA framework, we're going to ask you a little bit about how familiar you are with the concept of positive psychology. So if we're able to launch that poll now, hopefully it will appear on your screen and you'll be able to answer the questions. I'm not getting anything, so I'm just gonna do that, see if that works. There we go. So, oh no, that's the wrong one. Right. We've snuck ahead to the end. Let's try that one instead. Oh, and poll. Right. Sorry, everybody. That's causing chaos. Thank you, Tara. There we go. Are you very familiar, quite familiar, or not familiar at all with the concept of positive psychology? Now, I'm very conscious that if you have attended one of the previous webinars, then obviously your experience will be growing, hopefully, as we continue with this series. But thank you for taking the time to vote in there. I can see about 3/4 of you have voted. That's amazing. So we've got about 51% who are not familiar at all, which is really helpful for our conversations. Thank you for that. And about 12% of you are very familiar, and just over a third, 37, who are quite familiar. My printer has just woken up, so it's I'm just hope that hasn't distracted you too much. Thanks for sharing the results of that, Tara. What we will do now is get started with the conversation, and I'm just going to start off with a very general question for Sue, and that is, why is it that relationships are so essential for our well-being?
Well, I think just to start with, if you think about this anecdotally, if we think about ourselves, when we're having good relationships, healthy, positive relationships with family, with friends, with people around us, then we have more energy, we have a better sense of self, we have more resilience. And the opposite is true. Relationships are also at the crux of our worst moments when they're not going well. So it's really important that people know about what's involved in establishing and maintaining a good, positive, healthy relationship and how to repair it when things don't go well.
Mm. And in terms of research and the evidence, how strong is the evidence behind that, that, you know, that positive relationships do have that impact?
There has been, I'm going to cite a really important longitudinal study. It's called the Harvard study. And if anybody wants to know more about that, there's a fabulous TED talk by Ted Voldinger about this. And they started this in 1938. So it's very long. They started it off with just Harvard men looking at what was bringing them well-being into their lives. And then they moved it into Brooklyn. They moved it into having women and then the families of these people. So it's been a huge longitudinal study. And what they discovered is that beyond wealth, status, achievement, the quality of our lives is most enhanced by our relationships. It's really critically important, the central thing for our well-being.
Amazing, thank you. Do you know the details of that study, whether it included young people? Is there anything specific about the effect of relationships on young people?
I don't know how it did go in terms of how young people were when they started it out. But I know that the men that they were dealing with in the first instance were probably in their 30s. And I'm almost sure that they would have gotten much younger. But I don't know the details of their most recent work.
Yeah, okay, great. And do we know of any evidence to indicate the impact of positive relationships in terms of academic outcomes?
Oh, absolutely. Derlek and his colleagues in 2011 did a massive meta-analysis of the impact of social and emotional learning programs. Now, I don't know how much people know about the pillars of learning, but the pillars of learning are learning to know and learning to do, which is the knowledge and skills of the curriculum. But the other two pillars of learning that was put forward by UNESCO in 1996 are learning to be and learning to live together. And social and emotional learning is where children are learning to be and learning to live together. And this Derlek and colleagues meta-analysis of 270,000 young people found out that it not only improved relationships, attitudes, well-being, it also improved academic outcomes by a factor of 11%. That's massive. So actually, and if you think about it, it makes sense, doesn't it? If young people are happier in school, if things are going well around them, if they've got people that they can rely on, that they can speak to, that they can confide in, they can share things with, then they're going to be much happier about coming to school. And the research I've been doing recently for the latest book is looking very clearly at the fact that there's a lot of young people, particularly teenagers. And one of the main reasons that they actually are coming to school is because of the social aspects of school, because a lot of the curriculum is quite dull and not necessarily aligned with their interests. So what happens in schools is absolutely critical for well-being.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Laura, I'm going to bring you in here because I can see you nodding your head.
Yeah.
I assume that you agree. You're agreeing with this, and you're seeing lots of evidence of this reflected in your schools.
I am absolutely nodding away here. I couldn't agree more. Schools, like education, is all about relationships. It really is. Like this, like the students developing relationships with each other and learning what those relationships look like. Also developing relationships with other adults. A lot of the time, teachers are the other main adults adult in a young person's life that's not their family, and then by extension through things like personal development, PSHE programs, developing relationships with adults beyond school as well, which is so important, especially for young people who are from more challenging backgrounds or more deprived backgrounds, who don't have, again, many of those connections. That network that school and education provides is essential. And just following up from what Sue was saying, it's absolutely true that we find on an anecdotal basis that unhappy young people don't learn well. Young people who are unhappy, first of all, they don't come to school. That can be one of the first things that happen. We end up with severe attendance issues. That then has a huge knock-on effect further down the line, obviously in terms of academics, but it's a rolling thing as well. They're unhappy, they don't come in, they don't develop those relationships, they don't come in. They get more unhappy, and on it goes. One thing that we've done a lot at Ackland Burley, the other LSWAP schools, and I know other schools all across the country, is put lots of emphasis in our kind of pastoral support and pastoral programs through heads of years and other members of staff who are sometimes teaching staff, sometimes non-academic staff, whose role is to provide support specifically in those areas around withdrawal, around often mental health challenges, obviously not in a professional way. We're not doctors, but in that kind of support of helping young people to come in, to talk, to build those relationships and to develop them. And exactly as Sue says, we see the huge benefits of that.
Okay.
Laura, there's sorry, Sue, I was just going to say there's a question in the chat which picks up on that, just about the challenges at the moment, and particularly since COVID and coming back. We had the whole period of children being out of school and then disrupted school, and now coming back after COVID. What has the sort of impact been on that in terms of their relationship development?
So we've seen delays academically, but also, as you say, in relationship development. Our year sevens coming in, we found after COVID, struggled. They lost education at that crux between primary and secondary school, when there's so much growing up and development expected very quickly. But also our sixth formers who missed GCSEs, formal assessment, then went from a GCSE environment where you have your entire timetable filled and you're very closely monitored, to a level 3 environment where you have study periods, etc. And that kind of independent learning really struggled, and also the resilience to be able to cope with that and to be able to come back from disappointments and challenges. We really have found it incredibly hard, and there has been some support, financial support, etc., for catch up around academics, but it's very harder, I would argue, to backfill that that lack of relationship development that came about in that time.
Yeah, the research says that it's young people now who are struggling most with loneliness, and that obviously is going to impact on young people's mental health a great deal. One of the things I was going to say, Laura, following on from what you were saying, is that there's quite a good amount of research in the positive psychology research, particularly around positive emotions and negative emotions. And we know, in fact, again, everybody knows it to some extent, but the research is there. Frederickson did this research, says that negative emotions, anxiety, depression, those sorts of things, shut down cognitive pathways. So it's very much harder for people to learn and to memorize things when they're full of negative emotions. So promoting the positive in as many ways as possible really matters. And I just want to pick up on something else that you said there around one of the things that I feel is so strongly about is that well-being does not exist just in the lesson here, the PhD. It exists in the interactions that people have all day, every day, across the whole school. Teachers can create and crush dreams of young people with the words that they use.
Oh, absolutely. And I think we've all had experiences of that, in our own lives and our own experiences of education. But we do work very, very positively towards this. We have our staff are really visible around school. They are in corridors. They are out in the grounds at lunchtime. We talk to our students all the time. It's about those little relationships that you build in the corridor and and in the canteen, and as well as in after-school clubs and lunchtime clubs, in sports, all those kind of things that you're constantly there. And it's the relationships that are consistent then, and that those students know that you are there and that you're there every day, even if they don't want to see you, you're there. You're telling them to take their coat off or telling them to take their earphones out, but you are always there. And it's that reliability as well.
It's such an important part of a positive relationship. I mean, the work that I've done sort of itemizes the things that you would need to see in a healthy, positive relationship. And trust and reliability, people doing what they say they're going to do, is so important. And the other thing that we are talking about here is about how young people develop those relationships. And what you're doing, what you've just said, just really lifts my heart, really, because children, and this includes young people, they watch, they listen, they learn, and they copy. So when they see positive relationships around the school, it's one of the important things for their learning about what that relationship means and how to operate one.
Yeah. Again, on an anecdotal basis, I think we saw a lot of young people having issues at home over the pandemic, especially in London, people often in overcrowded homes, not getting any space, any breathing space from each other, those relationships turning quite toxic. So again, coming back into school and students having that lack of trust in adults in their lives in some senses. So being that kind of consistent, presence is really, really important.
Yes, it's one of the things that Helen McNamara said in the COVID inquiry, is that there was a lack of real understanding in the government and the government's response to COVID around the fact that there are people in circumstances that are not middle class and privileged and healthy, Yeah. And one of the things that is so important about schools and what coming back to school is that you can't do academic catch up if you haven't got those other things in place, and how important that is for young people. And there is now Beth Bodycoat has done some research looking at young people who are not fine in school. And she's set up a website, a Facebook page called Not Fine in School. And at the last count of that, people that are on that Facebook page, 430,000. 430,000 people not fine in school. So we have got to really focus on what actually enables young people to be wanting to come to school, to be wanting to engage with what's on offer for them.
Yeah, if I just on that about what's on offer for them, what's available in schools, obviously we've seen like the cross-party Lords Committee findings today, where what they've said about overloaded curriculum, disproportionate exam burden, that huge decline in creative and technical subjects. Yeah. This is also a prohibitive. It really, really is. We are, Acklam Burley has always been quite a creatively focused school. We still are. We have the Orchestra of the Age of Enlightenment based with us. We all across the SWAT, we really push that creativity, but it is hard. It's really hard against the backdrop that we've had for the past few years around curriculum, and that compartmentalized curriculum as well, that makes it hard for students, especially if you're not great at maths or whatever. It makes it hard for students to see the connection between different parts of their school lives and to want to come and engage.
Can I ask you both? Sorry. Can I jump in and ask you both just about the skills when you're talking about broadening the curriculum? That there is a skill element here, isn't there? It's not just that some people are good at relationships and some people are bad at relationships. There's a skill set, or there is a process at least of improving relationships. So could you just say something about to what extent these skills are learnable and teachable and trainable?
Absolutely, they are. I think it's harder for young people when they have not had social emotional learning from a young age, because it begins, relationships and understanding about relationships starts at birth, really, with attachment, and it continues throughout school, and that importance of kids feeling that they belong in school. But there are two aspects to relationships, three actually. One is having a positive sense of self. If you don't have a positive sense of self, it's quite hard to tune into other people. But there are ways of doing that that are really quite innovative. I mean, look at the roots of empathy things that are going on in schools. The second one is perceptions of other people. If you think people are out to get you, then it's quite hard to open yourself out to them. And the third one is the skills that young people do need to learn. They need to learn attitudes and perceptions and tune into our shared humanity, if you like. But it's also about some of the skills that, you know, include being able to have a good conversation. I think some of our young people have not learned how to have a good conversation. So much as what's been going on has been a one-way street, you know, so they don't necessarily learn to take interest or to show interest in other people. One of the things that schools can do, and I've seen this around a number of schools internationally, is do things like, I've been reading about it today, about schools having a kindness week and actually thinking about other people, thinking about what they might do to support other people, random acts of kindness, and actually beginning to tune in. If they have not experienced empathy, kindness, trust, respect, it's quite hard to put those into operation with people. But if you've got social and emotional learning that happens regularly throughout school right from 5 to 18, you have social emotional learning lessons which enable people to do things that enable them to learn how to talk with each other, ask questions, show interest, that kids are mixed up, so they speak to people outside their usual social circles, so they get to interact with a variety of people. Those sorts of things are really important. Learning, for instance, what you do when a relationship breaks up and telling people how to do it, by and large, doesn't work. So it needs to be agentic. You need to have kids working together in small groups, presenting them with scenarios, hypotheticals, and getting them to talk about it. Just one example of that would be about social media. So you mix students up, you get them into groups of 3 or 4, and you say, talk about what are the really good things about social media, things that really boost your understanding, your learning, your interactions, etc. And what are the things about social media that are harmful? And then they will come to their own conclusions about things like young people. We know, for instance, that girls are particularly girls, constantly comparing themselves with others and never feeling that they're good enough. And I think that that is actually quite difficult in a relationship because they don't have a positive sense of self. So when young people can talk about together some of those really critical issues, then they are much more likely to develop an understanding and the skills that are necessary in terms of being able to establish a positive relationship with each other.
I think that's a really excellent point, and it'd be lovely to know if anybody in the is able to share in the chat how, if they're doing any of this type of work with students in much more sort of discursive group-based work during PSHE lessons or whatever. And whilst you think about that, maybe just wanted to say that yes, we shall get a collection of the references and the research together that is mentioned throughout the webinar, and we'll make sure you've got access to those afterwards. One of the themes coming through the chat is very much about the use of technology and how this might have impacted relationships within young people. Yeah, Laura, do you think you can expand on that in terms of what the positives and the negatives of that and what you're seeing in school specifically?
So again, to bring it back to the pandemic, obviously we saw there a very sudden change for a lot of schools in how we use technology ourselves, and a sudden need to be able to use forums like we're using now, sort of online lessons. And so we've found that we've integrated technology a lot more into our teaching and into our everyday sort of lives at school, which can only be a positive thing. It enables students to access things in a lot of other ways. Those things have been really positive. I think it's been really good for a lot of teachers as well, or people working in education, to learn very quickly more about technology that they maybe weren't so familiar with, that suddenly we had to get familiar with. However, in a less positive sense, we have very strict policies about phones in school, which we have to implement because otherwise students are very much stuck to them in class and at all times. We find it difficult to get students away from phones. A lot of that is social media that they're using on phones. We do a lot of work in our personal development all the way through from year 7 and still into sixth form about use, exactly the kind of conversations that Sue was just saying about use of social media, about positives and negatives, and about how students themselves feel that it impacts on them. I think the difficulty around it can be is a lot of the time young people think, and in some cases they're right, they think that we don't understand or use social media and technology in the same way that they do. And they can see a bit of a kind of generational barrier, I think, between teachers saying, oh, put your phone away, you don't need it. And they feel very differently about that phone. It represents something very different to them to what it might represent to a teacher. We have students who have quite severe anxiety about being separated from their phones, which again, anecdotally, I think we saw worse coming back after COVID. So even simple things like exam regulations, you have to put your phone in the basket, you have to have your phone sealed in your bag, become much more difficult when you have a young person who has a genuine fear of being separated from their phone and from that kind of security blanket that they see there. It's an extremely complex situation.
Laura, can I ask you about intergender relationships in
Oh yeah.
Your setting is a mixed gender setting with a majority of boys, which is interesting.
Yep.
And there's been so much talk about the challenges of developing healthy relationships between gender groups and gender identities.
Yep, absolutely.
What the work you've done there.
Yeah, we are, as you say, we are predominantly boys in the lower school. When it gets to our sixth form, we even out because we have such an intake from other schools. But the lower school is very, very boy heavy. We've done different things around this. So I think the emphasis a few years ago was to try and sort of work with groups of boys, perhaps trying things like single gender tutor groups and things like that. But we've moved away from that now, and it is much more about like you say, trying to have relationships between boys and girls rather than separating them out between all genders. So in an academic sense, one thing, for example, that we practice that is policy throughout the school is about questioning techniques around things like not having hands up, because to make sure that our girls are actually getting foregrounded in the lessons, because often they can get lost in boys who are sometimes more competitive or louder. But in terms of that relationship in our personal development lessons, again, through lower school, but into sixth form in particular, we've done a lot of work around gendered language, around sexual harassment, around consent, around not just sexual harassment in a really obvious ways that students might recognize it, but ways that they're using language or behaviors that they might not recognize as being sexist or problematic. Work with things like the White Ribbon Project, and also encouraging boys to call out behaviors that they see, and sort of helping to support more femme presenting people by calling out what they see as negative boys' behavior. We know we've had lots of students who've led on this as well, student-led poster campaigns. Our students are very passionate about this. And it, you know, there is such a background of misogyny online, really, that we have seen increase in the last couple of years. And we've seen it creep in a way that we haven't before. And it is about challenging that all the time, not just teachers, but trying to empower our young people, including our boys, to call it out.
Yeah, there's a couple of, I just wanted to mention a couple of things at risk of doing a short commercial break. But so the first thing is that within the brainwaves Key Stage 5 lessons that exist across the 6 lessons, actually Sue created a lesson for us around listening and talking and having conversations around mental health, and actually that's something that's very close to the day's DNA more generally, because we really believe in the importance of developing oracy skills, which is about listening as much as talking, and creating a healthy environment in which people can talk to each other and develop their own opinions in a safe way and feel respected in doing that. And so there's lots of stuff in there. We've got a series of things on free resources, again, open to everybody, around Andrew Tate and topics, which we talked about, did a webinar on a few weeks ago, actually. So yeah, there is material out there, but these skills are so important, it seems to me.
So important. And it's also really important for us to support our teachers in being confident to be able to deliver this, because it is hard. It can be really challenging for members of staff to address this as well. And being able to support them with that is really important.
Thanks for that, Julian and Laura. I think Tara has mentioned in the chat the link to our website where these lessons the brainwaves lessons are available. Worth pointing out at this point that they are free lessons. There's no commercial charge for them. So it wasn't so much of a commercial break, Julian, you're okay. And then also just to say that, yes, Sue has been instrumental in writing some lessons for Key Stage 3 and 4 as well. And those will be available in January. And they're very much based on, just coming back to what you said right at the very start, Sue, about establishing, maintaining and repairing relationships. We do a lot on conflict and repair, a lot on sort of active listening. Can you give us a summary maybe of the most powerful strategies that we can encourage young people to use to develop, more positive relationships in their life?
I think one of the things that is important, I mean, teenagers, we're talking here very largely about teenagers, and teenagers are at the stage of developing their identity, working out who they are, who they want to be, what values they hold, and they're going to resist being told what to think and what to do, because that doesn't develop a healthy identity. So opportunities for young people to talk with each other in safe places. I mean, one of the things that Laura has been saying is that teachers don't always feel necessarily comfortable. It's quite difficult doing this. And some of the research has said that social emotional learning has not always been a safe place for teachers, because, they're potentially asking young people to talk about difficult emotions, which might lead to breaching confidentiality, and that's an issue. So ensuring that social emotional learning happens in a safe, strengths-based, solution-focused environment means that you're not going to open Pandora's box of difficulties with teachers who neither have the time and possibly not the resources to address that in a public arena. So for me, social emotional learning has You have to think about the pedagogy of social emotional learning and give young people opportunities to talk with each other in a structured, safe, supported place.
Great. Anything anybody wants to chip in there, Julian?
I mean, I absolutely agree with all of that. I think that there is something around how teachers in particular talk about, as you were saying earlier, Laura, there's something about modeling good relationships as well, and how in both in their relationships with students and in their relationships with colleagues. And you know, the young people pick up on all of that, all of that sort of culture within the school. And if the school, and this is actually something you know, we want to come on to, is whether one can create a culture of positive relationships in a school, and what that looks like. I mean, Laura, what do you feel about that?
I think you can. I think it starts with your staff being happy. As
Yeah.
you said about, if you can't model positive relationships or have positive relationships if you don't have a positive sense of self. I think if your staff feel are unhappy at work, I think it is hard, because a lot of that positive relationship modeling actually comes from, as we said, those quiet moments, those little bits where you see your teachers, they like each other, they like coming to work, they enjoy their time in the classroom, they enjoy talking to each other, they enjoy spending that time talking to students. That is not, a lot of that isn't something you can manufacture. It's about creating a work environment where people are happy, and that is, we know all the barriers that there are to that. But alongside that, things that we can actively do, I think it is about taking that time to be with students, to talk to students. It's about having staff rotated on, silly things, but rotated on to do duty, so you're student facing all the time, so they see you around, and you are and not and just talking, being around them. I think it is those little things so often, just showing up and being there, even if it's raining.
Sorry, is it harder in a larger school, do you think?
Yes.
That's a fascinating question.
When you've got sort of,
are smaller schools happier? Discuss.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's harder in a larger school, just physically, in that it's bigger and it's harder to get around, and students are moving around more. There's other things around larger schools as well, in that they can often feel a little bit more chaotic and things like that, in terms of student movement around, break times and whatever. And it's harder to know, or you can't know all the students in a school that size. You can't know all the students we have 135 students just based in our year 12, and across the consortium it's 500 year 12s. You can't know them in the way that you can in a much smaller school. But there are huge, there are benefits to both. It is harder, but we still have, though, a pastoral base. You have your head of year, you have your tutor, you have those members of staff that you see every day, and that. So there are these little islands within the bigger school of staff that you do get to know better.
Yeah. Have you any thoughts on that, Sue?
Some schools have got a house system, or the equivalent of a house system, so that there are smaller units within. But I'd like to also pull up on something that Laura actually just said, is that we have really government policies in the last decade or more have undermined the respect for teachers, the ability or the focus in schools for some of these really, really important things. And I think that we can see that, not only are young people voting with their feet, but we've also seen a lot of teachers voting with their feet. So it's incredibly important that we bring back respect for teachers. And I've cited a lot of the work I've done. I've cited what's happening in Finland, where there are 10 times as many people wanting to be teachers as there are places to be teachers, as there are jobs. And that's very largely because they are well respected, they are paid well, they have a lot of autonomy. And what's happened in many schools these days is that autonomy has been taken away from them. You know, we talk about the importance of giving kids agency, being able to make their own decisions and take action for themselves. And that needs to happen across a school so that teachers also have autonomy.
Put a question
Absolutely.
here, Sue. In a situation where some students misunderstand your intentions when you're trying to communicate with them, what do you do then? That when you get that sort of mismatch, and sometimes that feels, well, okay, so now I'm perhaps talking as a parent. So this, you know, one experiences this sometimes when you feel that intentions on both sides probably are misunderstood. What are some strategies for dealing with that? And maybe you could link that back a little bit to what you were saying earlier about conflict and resolution as well.
I think one of the important things around again, teachers, is that teachers don't take some of those things that kids might say personally, because it's often not to do with them. It's what they've brought to school. It's some of the difficulties that they're experiencing that are just sometimes sort of let out at teachers. And sometimes I've suggested that teachers use strategies that are a little bit like go with the flow. So if a teacher, if a student says to a teacher, you know, you're rubbish at this and you don't understand me and what have you, that you actually turn that around and said, what would help this situation? You go back to the student and ask them. And we know, for instance, that, you know, some students, those with a very poor sense of self, find it very difficult to take praise. We know that they do. So it has to be very specific. So, you know, one of the things that a school has done, and this is, I don't have the research at my fingertips, but they have spent time at the beginning of the school year getting teachers to work with students, finding out 5 things they have in common with each other. You know, and you can do that by sort of mixing people up and playing games. A couple of days of that sort of game playing, interactive stuff, it has boosted academic outcomes by an incredible amount, because once you find that you've got something in common with a teacher, maybe you like the same music, maybe you support the same team, you can just have micro conversations with them that actually link into that connection. And we know that those sorts of things promote a sense of school belonging, and a sense of school belonging is now very rich within the literature, and about how important it is that kids feel that they belong to school. And that, of course, is all to do with the relationships. Laura, what do you think?
No, I completely agree. It is those conversations that you have about when, you know, it's when you ever hear a student in your class say they don't like Jurassic Park, and then you're, how can you possibly not? And it's those moments that you remember of those silly little bits of relationship building that years later you remember, and it gives you that in, like, with those students as well. I completely agree, Sue, about what you said as well about students who are often bringing external conflict into that, and they're shouting at you because they know that you're a safe person to shout at a lot of the time. Like, teachers are safe people, but I'm not saying that's easy for teachers. It's not. Like, I was a classroom teacher for a long time, and it's rough. But a lot of the time the reason for that is that you are safe, and it can be really worth just drawing a line under that, because when they come back into your classroom the next day, often it's a reset and you can start again.
Yeah, not bearing grudges really matters. And also being able to just say sorry when you've overreacted. My very first job was I spent most of my life with young people, teenagers. My very first job was with little kids. And I can remember at the end of one day sort of saying to them, I've been tired and I've been grumpy. I'm really sorry. And they all looked up at me and said, that's all right, Miss. And I think that it doesn't often happen. They don't hear those apologies.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily have somebody welcome them with a smile every day, not holding grudges, and just say those little things that you say to them, or just looking pleased to see them, or say to somebody, do you know, I love the way you're so challenging to me. You know, in a way, pulls the rug from under their feet. But you have to be on top of your game and have the ability to be creative and have your
Yes.
well-being in place to
And
be
have
able
confidence.
to do those things.
You have to
Absolutely.
have confidence to do that, don't you? And so
Yeah.
it makes me think we definitely need to create some happiness for teachers materials, Tracy.
Yes.
We need to
Yes.
Yeah, and I love
Completely.
Charlotte's comment there, you know, genuinely caring and that they are still children and need, you know, needing love and guidance, I think is a very important message. I think we're going to have to call it a day. Thank you so much, everybody. That has whizzed by. I've been engrossed in your conversation and hardly needed to ask any questions. You just pinged off each other, which is wonderful. So thank you for that. Before we go, I know we can just launch a final poll just to see how you are feeling after these conversations and whether you've got any more plans to introduce a bit more of this relationships element of or positive psychology into your work as a result of the webinar. And whilst we launched the webinar, I just wanted to very quickly give you a quick reminder about why we're here and what we're doing at Brainwaves and how you can potentially get involved as a school or a college. So we're a 10-year, Brainwaves is a 10-year mental health research and education project led by the University of Oxford in collaboration with the Day. One of our main aims is to address the gap in research on adolescent mental health. And we're doing this by a longitudinal study that's going to involve 50,000 students aged 16 to 18. So if you are interested at all in contributing to this research, and would like to become a research partner with, thank you, Tara, become a research partner with the University of Oxford and Brainwaves, then please do let us know. We're looking to actively recruit schools with sixth form provision. As I mentioned, Laura's schools at the SWOP consortium are involved with that. But if you are interested in finding out a bit more, then please do contact us. I've just put the email address in the chat. It's going to whiz by because everybody's putting their comments in, but we'll try that. Okay, so here's a quick look. Do you plan to introduce a bit more psychology? 76% said yes. Amazing. That's fantastic. And a quarter of you are a possibly. So that's wonderful in terms of the positive outcomes of this webinar today. So thank you very much for taking part. Thank you for sharing all your comments. And thank you to our panelists. It's been wonderful to have you here this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure. Thanks very much for having us.
Good to see you all. Wishing everybody a very happy Christmas now. We look forward to catching up with you again in the new year. So thanks for joining us. See you soon and take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.